Hi, I'm Eric Siegel with ericstrains.com, and this is episode 50 of Eric's Trains. Okay, so here we are. It's April of 2015, and this is episode 50. 50 is always a special number, so to celebrate 50 episodes, I'm going to be doing something today that I haven't done in quite a while, and that a lot of you guys have been asking for. I'm going to do a grand tour of the layout, so I'm going to show you every room and every table, and even what's underneath the layout, and try to explain to you as much as I can. Now, just so you know, the reason I don't make these tour videos very often is because they take a very long time to film, and so I sort of have to put everything on hold while I'm filming them. I started this in January of 2015, and here we are in April, and I'm just now finishing it up. So they take a long time to film, so that's why I only do them every few years. But anyway, what I'm going to do is start off with some facts and figures on the layout, then we'll get into the tour, and then afterwards we'll run some trains around the layout for a few minutes. So there's a lot in store. This is going to be a long episode, so grab a coffee or a soda or a beer or whatever you like, sit back, relax, and let's get started. So, the name of my layout is the Appalachian and Western Railroad. It is a 3-rail O-scale layout. Construction began in January of 2007. I had originally expected to have the layout finished by around 2014 or 2015, but here we are, and the layout is not finished. So right now I'm thinking that it probably won't be done for another 3 to 5 years, and even then, as we all know, a layout is really never complete. We're always working on them. So as you watch this video and I take you on a tour of my layout, keep in mind that pretty much everything you're seeing is still under construction and under development. This is still very much a work in progress. When it comes to the size of the layout, it's difficult to measure it in so many feet long and so many feet wide like most layouts. And that's because the layout is spread out over 4 different rooms here in the basement. So I measure it in square feet, and right now the layout is around 500 square feet in size. The height of the layout for the main level of track is at 47 inches, and then the upper level of track rides about 12 inches above the lower level. The Appalachian and Western is a modern themed layout, so the scenery and the structures and so forth are all meant to depict modern times. When I'm running things prototypically, I will run trains from the 1970s onward. However, as many of you know, I do like steam engines and early diesels, so oftentimes I will break the rules and just run whatever I want. But the layout itself is modern themed. Let's talk about the setting for the layout and the inspiration behind it. 3 of the 4 rooms are set in a fictionalized southeastern U.S., and the inspiration for that was that I live in Georgia, and ever since I was a kid, I've been camping and backpacking up in the Appalachian Mountains, up in North Georgia and North Carolina, Smoky Mountains, Pisgah, that area. And so that was a big source of inspiration. And then the final room is set in a sort of fictionalized Colorado. And the inspiration for that was that back in 2007, I went on a backpacking trip out to Colorado, out to Rocky Mountain National Park. And so that was a big inspiration for that room. Pretty much all of the track and switches on the layout, including on the narrow gauge line in the Colorado room, are made by Atlas. I do have one Ross switch here in the main room, and I may add some more Ross switches in the future, but right now pretty much everything is Atlas. The signals on the layout right now, they are all Atlas, like this one here, although I will probably integrate some signals from Z-Stuff and MTH as well in the future. The minimum curve on the layout is 063, but that's only in the yard. Outside of the yard, the minimum curve is 072, and the maximum curve is 090. Let's talk about the trains that you're going to see on this layout. The O-scale trains are a mixture of Lionel, MTH, Atlas, and Weaver, and then the trains on the narrow gauge line in the Colorado room are made by Bachmann. Every train on this layout is controlled digitally, so for the Lionel, Weaver, and Atlas O-scale engines, I use the Lionel Legacy Command System here. For the MTH O-scale engines, I use the MTH Digital Command System, or DCS. And then for the engines on the narrow gauge line here in the Colorado room, I use DCC, and for that I use a Digitrax DCS51. Now, in addition to using the MTH digital command system to run my MTH O-scale engines, I also use it to control many of the switches on the layout. I've got a lot of the switches wired into my MTH AIU, or accessory interface unit, and that allows me to throw those switches via the MTH remote. You'll see the accessory interface unit later on in this video. All of the O-scale track on this layout is powered by 4 Lionel 180 watt powerhouse bricks, and you'll see those later on in this video. And then I've also got a number of smaller transformers to power things like accessories and lights and so forth. And I've also got a few small DC transformers like the one that powers the narrow gauge line here in the Colorado room. You're gonna see a lot of hand ballasted track on this layout. I get my ballast from my good friend Dennis Brennan of Brennan's Model Railroading. It's the best ballast on the market, at least in my opinion, and you can find it at www.brennansmodelrr.com. The scenery supplies that I use on my layout come from 4 main sources. There's Brennan's Model Railroading, Scenic Express, Woodland Scenics, and Bragdon Enterprises. You're going to see a lot of rocks on this layout like you see here. They're all sorts of different colors, shapes, and sizes, but they all come from the same place. They are made by pouring plastic casting resin and polyurethane foam into latex rock molds. The latex rock molds come from Bragdon Enterprises, and I did an extensive tutorial video a few years back that documents the entire process of making these rocks. So if you want to know how to make them, you can find that tutorial on my YouTube channel. One of the most common questions I get is from people who want to know where I get these great backdrops on the layout. These are photo backdrops that I bought from a place called Backdrop Warehouse. You can find them at www.backdropwarehouse.com. We'll talk about this a little later on in the video, but just in case you're wondering, you're going to see these nice bridges that are made of metal. These are custom-made stainless steel bridges that I got from a place called Stainless Unlimited. And again, we'll talk more about it later in the video. Okay, so let's start things off in the stairwell leading down to the layout room. On the walls, I've got some assorted train signs. You'll see some more in just a minute. And then I've got a whole mess of these display shelves. These display shelves are made by Glenn Snyder Display Systems. They're made from extruded aluminum, and they are fantastic. In a previous episode of Eric's Trains, I talked at length about these shelves, and I even showed you how to install them. So if you're interested, check out that previous episode. You can find more information about that episode at the bottom of the screen right now. But as we go down and turn the corner, we've got some more signs. Some of these signs were gifts that were given to me by people who visited the layout, and that's really touching. I really like that. And then as we move on down, you can see some more of the Glenn Snyder shelving wrapping around the top. And then down here, we've got some homemade shelving. Now, the general rule that I like to use is that for any shelving that's high enough where kids won't be able to reach, I use the open Glenn Snyder shelving. And then for anything that's down low where kids might be able to accidentally damage something when they're visiting the layout, I made my own shelving so that eventually I could put plexiglass doors on the front, and that would prevent kids from accidentally damaging the trains when they visit the layout. I haven't put the plexiglass doors on the front of this cabinet yet, but I will at some point in the future. And these are nothing fancy. It's just some premium pine that I screwed together and then stained to make it look nice. It's really not rocket science at all. And then as we move down, we come to the main layout room. So this is the main room of the layout, and as I said, the layout consists of 4 rooms. This is the largest of those 4 rooms. The main table here measures about 25 by 8 in size. And then there's this L extension over here. Now there's quite a lot going on here, so what I'm going to do is first focus on the lower level of track. So we'll start with the main table and talk about the yard and so forth, and then we'll follow the main line around here and then through the other 3 rooms of the layout until we end up back here in the main room. And then after that, we'll tackle the upper level, and we'll also take a look at what's underneath the layout. So on the main table here, there are 3 loops of track. The outer 2 loops are the mainline tracks, and we'll get to those later. The inner loop is the yard lead that's used for the yard. And yes, this is a functioning yard. I can take apart trains and put them back together. A lot of times on O-gauge layouts, the yards are cosmetic, but this is a functioning yard. What I did is I did a little research into how yards work, and then I took all of those components and sort of scaled them down for this layout. So the way it works is that a train is pulled onto the yard lead, and then the engine detaches itself and pulls itself onto this track right here that crosses the turntable. And so the engine can either park itself on one of the stalls around the turntable, or it can take itself down here to the engine service area. There are 2 sections to the engine service area. 2 of the tracks go to the diesel facility, which is currently under construction. That is a scratch-built structure that I'm working on. It's the first major scratch-built structure that I've ever done, so I am taking my time with it on purpose so I can get it right. So it's sort of halfway done right now, and hopefully I'll get it finished sometime this year, I hope. The other track is right here, the track with the reefer on it, and that is going to be for a fuel facility so the engines can gas up. So that takes care of the engine. Now as for the rest of the train, a switcher is then pulled out from the auxiliary track, which is behind those Pan Am boxcars. You can't really see it very well from this angle. And the switcher comes around and attaches to the train, pulls the train around, and proceeds to drill the cars down into the classification tracks in the classification yard. And that's how a train is taken apart, and then you just reverse the process to put a train back together. The classification yard consists of 5 classification tracks and then 1 auxiliary track, and the total capacity for the yard is about 38 cars. The turntable is a Millhouse River Studio turntable. As many of you know, I used to have an Atlas turntable, and then about midway through last year, 2014, I swapped that out for the Millhouse River Studio turntable, which is infinitely superior to the Atlas turntable. Not that I'm putting down the Atlas turntable. It is a great turntable for the money, but the Millhouse River Studio turntable is simply much more prototypical and realistic, and it should be because it costs about 10 times what the Atlas turntable costs. So again, the Atlas turntable is a fine turntable. There was nothing wrong with it. It's just that I wanted something a little more realistic, and that's what I got with the Millhouse River Studio turntable. It is an operating turntable, and you will see it in operation later in this video. There are 17 whisker tracks around the turntable, so I can store 16 engines plus 1 little trackmobile on that tiny whisker track over there on the other side. Now, if you're interested in how I installed the Millhouse River Studio turntable and how I set it up, check out episodes 44, 45, and 46 of Eric's Trains. Anyway, as good as the yard looks right now, keep in mind that like most of this layout, it is not 100% complete. Now, some sections you can tell that it's not complete, like over here. And then other sections, they look pretty good, but still, they're not complete. The yard is functional, but it's missing all of the extra stuff like roads and vehicles and people and structures and lights and so forth. I did add some yard lights to the classification yard last year, but I still have more to add. There's lots more work to do here. So like I said, it looks pretty good right now, but keep in mind it is not complete. Cutting right through the middle of the yard is this creek. There's one section over here and then another section over here that goes underneath the classification yard. Now, last year I started adding water and details to this side of the creek, and it's looking pretty good. Again, it's not 100% complete, but it's looking pretty good. Over here, not so much. I have not yet added water or anything else, so there's a little bit more work to do on this side. But overall, it's coming along good. Now, if you're interested in knowing how to do water in a creek like this, check out episode 49 of Eric's Trains. Oh, by the way, in case you're wondering about that AWRX bridge back there in the classification yard, that is an Atlas girder bridge that I installed, and then I simply took some white sticky letters and put AWRX on the girder bridge. AWRX, of course, standing for Appalachian and Western Railroad. Okay, that takes care of the yard. Now let's talk about the two mainline tracks here. The middle track is a simple loop around the main table. There are some switches to allow the train to go between the other loops, but all this does is circle the main table. The outer track also circles the main table, but then it also has this Y switch that allows the train to go off this way through this tunnel, over here, and then off to the other three rooms on the layout before returning to the main room. This Atlas Y switch back here that I already showed you is also part of a functioning Y that allows me to change the direction of the trains down here. So there's a switch right here, there's another switch back there in the tunnel that you can't see, and then there's one more switch in that tunnel that you can't see, and there's also some track going behind this rock here. And so the combination of those three switches allows me to change the direction of the trains. Now, ordinarily, you want to try to avoid having switches inside tunnels if you can, because it can be problematic. But in order to assist with that, I created some access panels that allow me to get to those switches in case there's some sort of issue. So there's an access panel under this station that allows me to get to the switch in that tunnel. And then there's another access panel behind this stone wall that allows me to get to the switch that's over on this side. Anyway, let's go ahead and follow this track. It goes through that tunnel, as you saw, which goes through this mountain, and then the train comes out of that tunnel portal back there, and then comes around this way. We've got a siding here, and this is the site of a future industry. I'm not quite sure what's going to be here yet. I don't know if I'm going to buy a building off the shelf or build something from scratch or kit bash something. I'll probably end up kit bashing something, but I'm not quite sure what's going to go here yet. Anyway, the track continues on through this tunnel, and on the other end we will come out in the second room, which is the hallway room. Oh, by the way, you're going to see a lot of these tunnel portals and stone walls around the layout. Most of these come from Scenic Express. Now, the tunnel portals don't look like this when you buy them from Scenic Express. They have an arch in the middle. And what I've done is I've removed the arch in order to widen the portal to allow my big articulated steam engines through. But most of these portals and walls do come from Scenic Express. On the other end of that tunnel, we come into what I call the hallway room because it's in the hallway of the basement. The hallway room is the smallest of the four layout rooms. It's a connecting point of sorts. It connects all of the other rooms together. There's not a whole lot of train activity going on here because of its size, but I like that. To me, the hallway room is sort of the backcountry of the layout. I like to think of it as a national park with a few tracks going through it. There's no buildings, there's no industries or anything like that. There's just some nice scenery and some tracks cutting through it. So let's take a look at what we've got here. Up on top of this mountain, we've got some backpackers. And this scene is inspired by real life because my family and I like to go backpacking quite a bit. And so there I am with the staff in hand. And there's my wife making a fire and cooking some dinner. And there's my son sitting on the log. And we've got some bear cubs visiting the campsite. And as you can see over here, Mama Bear and Papa Bear are not too happy about that, and they're coming down to make some trouble. And the bears are also inspired by real life because my family and I like to go backpacking in the Smoky Mountains quite a bit. And it is not uncommon to have black bears come through your campsite. There's quite a large population of black bears up there, and while attacks are very rare, they will often come through your campsite looking for food, and so this is sort of a spoof on that. The figures of the bears as well as the backpackers are available from Woodland Scenics, so if you like them, that's where I got those figures. The only recent addition to this scene is that green tree, which I added not too long ago. All the other stuff has been in place for quite a while now. Anyway, moving on, we've got this rock wall down here to the left of the track. I have not made very many changes to it in recent history. It's been there for a while. I did make some renovations over here because I had to do some track renovations down here, but I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Over here, we've got some recent work in the form of all of this overgrowth around the abandoned track. The abandoned track has been here for quite a while, but the overgrowth is new. The story here is that at one point there was a switch and it went off to a spur line, and then at some point in history that line was abandoned. They ripped out the switch, leaving only a few ties and rails, but most of the line is still intact. If you saw this a year or so ago, or even at the open house, you didn't see very much overgrowth. It was mainly just some basic ground cover, and all of this overgrowth is a recent addition. The overgrowth is a combination of three products. The first one is this grass product called wild grass. It's made by a German company called Heki, I believe is how it's pronounced, or maybe Heki. I'm not German, so I'm probably butchering it. It's spelled H-E-K-I, and I buy a lot of their trees, and now I'm buying their wild grass product. And I really like it. It's here in the hallway room, it's in the main room, it's in the Carolina room and the Colorado room. I've really come to like it quite a bit. Interspersed in the wild grass are tufts of this buffalo grass material, which is a product called Silflor that's available just like the wild grass through scenicexpress.com. I really like these buffalo grass tufts. They come in little teeny tufts that you just glue down and then look really nice. And then inside the tufts, I've glued down some strands of this long field grass material from Woodland Scenics. So I think it looks pretty good. It's not done yet, just like most of the layout, but it's looking better than it has in the past. And I'm still working on getting the overgrowth even more advanced than it is now. But I like it. So at the end of the abandoned line, there's an abandoned chassis system boxcar. This is an MTH model that I've had for quite a long time. At some point along the way, I accidentally broke off some of the grab irons and steps on the car, and so I decided to turn it into a test car for testing various weathering techniques. And so if you take a good look, you'll see all sorts of different weathering methods on the car, and I still use it as a test car to this day. Anytime I want to work on a new weathering technique, I'll try it out on this car. And despite the fact that it's used for testing purposes, I think it actually looks pretty good, and so I figured, well, I might as well get some use out of it on the layout, and so I stuck it at the end of the abandoned line here, and I think it looks very appropriate. Above the abandoned line, we come to this rock climbing area, and this has been here for a long time. These two rock climbing figures have been here for several years at least. I guess I feel sorry for them because they're never going to reach the top. I can't exactly remember where I bought these figures, but I want to say that they're made by Woodland Scenics, but I could be wrong on that. Now, I have done some work in this area recently. When I first built this rock climbing area, I put this flat part here, figuring that this would be where the rock climbers would start their ascent. And so a few months ago, I added this staircase so that the rock climbers can walk down the abandoned line, go up the stairs, and then start their rock climbing activities. This is the first staircase that I've ever built. I made it out of strips of basswood, and it's okay. I'm not 100% happy with it, but for a first try, I think I did a pretty good job. Now, you're probably looking at this and saying, Eric, it looks good, but when I look at it, I see all sorts of flaws and things that I could have done better. And that's the way it is, you know, whether you're creating a layout or a song or a sculpture or a painting, the creator always sees the stuff they could have done better, and that's what I see when I look at this staircase. So it nags at me, and for that reason, at some point in the future, I will probably tear this down and build a nicer staircase, but for now, it'll do. I did weather the staircase, and if I zoom in here, you'll be able to see that the stairs do look pretty well used. To weather the staircase, I utilized two different techniques. First of all, I painted the entire staircase black, and then over the black I painted a beige wood coloring, and then I used really fine sandpaper to sand through the beige and reveal the black on the stairs to make them look well used and scuffed up and so forth. And then secondly, over the entire staircase I applied a coat of black chalk powder to make the whole thing look dirty, and overall I think the weathering looks pretty good. Aside from the staircase, I've also recently added a couple of signs to the area. And again, this is a first. I've never made my own signs. There's one here at the bottom and then one up top. I made the signs on my computer in Photoshop, and then I just printed them off and stuck them to these signposts, which are made from basswood. Here's a look at the bottom sign. It's got the National Park logo on it, and then this area is called Oliver Pass Scenic Overlook. Oliver is the name of a new kitten that we got a few months ago. He loves the layout. He thinks it's one big kitty condo, and so we named this area Oliver Pass. And then up top, we've got the second sign, which contains the rules and regulations for the park. There it is. And there are actual rules and regulations on the sign, but the type is very small, so it's pretty much impossible to read. I put a few jokes in the rules and regulations, but again, it's so small you really can't see them. And then finally, I added a garbage can to the area. I figured since we're going to have rock climbers, you need to have a garbage can so they don't litter. And I just stole that garbage can off of one of my MTH buildings. Moving up above the rock climbing area, we've got some pretty mountain scenery up here. I haven't done much work here recently. I may have added a couple new trees, but that's about it. Like most areas of the layout, this is not complete. I still need to add quite a few trees and some additional scenery. I'm going to put a structure of some sort right over here. It may be an old abandoned cabin or maybe an old fire tower, and that should help it look more complete. And then down here, again, I want to add some more scenery eventually, so none of this is 100% complete. And then we come over here and we've got a second tunnel and the lift bridge and some additional track over here at the end of the hallway room. But I'm going to come back to this in a few minutes when we come back through this tunnel from the Carolina room. For now, we're going to come over here and follow the track through this tunnel. Now, this tunnel has recently been renovated. I decided to widen the curve in the Carolina room last year to make way for larger engines, and part of that renovation meant shifting this track over to the left and widening the tunnel, and so I did that. So all of this is new track, and it looks that way. If you look over here, this ballast looks older and dirtier, and this track and ballast looks newer. And that was done on purpose so that it looks like the railroad ripped it up and redid the track. So I think it looks pretty good. So now we're going to go through this tunnel and come out in the Carolina room. On the other side of that tunnel, we come out into what I call the Carolina room. This is the largest table in the Carolina room. There's some additional stuff over here, but we'll get back to that when we follow the track and come back into this room in a few minutes. This is the most incomplete table on the layout, as you can see, and because of that, it has sort of become the makeshift workbench of the layout, but that won't last forever because eventually there will be a town here and an industry on this siding. Now, even though this is the most incomplete section of the layout, I actually have done some work here recently. I've added some more trees up on the hill, although you can hardly tell. I still need to add quite a few more trees for it to look right. And as I said, I also redid this curve to allow larger engines to get through. And that meant ripping up all of the track and all of the ballast and redoing that tunnel, as well as most of that tunnel over there. And I've reballasted the curve, but I haven't gotten around to reballasting the siding yet, but I will at some point. And then I've also done some work on the lake. In the back there, that is eventually going to be a waterfall once I get up the nerve to start working on it. And then that waterfall will come into this lake. And I've done a little bit of work on the lake. I did a rough draft paint job, as you can see, just to see how it would look. And I'm pretty happy with the results, so at some point I will do a final draft paint job, and then I'll put some fake water on top, and it should look nice. And then of course I'll add some swimmers and some canoers and so forth, so in the end I think it's going to look really nice, but I can't finish the lake until I do the waterfall, so I really need to get on that at some point in the near future. In this corner of the lake you can see there's a sluice gate, and that sluice gate will allow the water to go under the track through a tunnel and come out into a creek that will be over here, and there will be a water wheel in the creek attached to a mill, but that's all coming in the future. There's not much to see right now. I want to take just a minute and talk about the color of the water in this lake. On a lot of layouts, the water is typically blue. The layout builder will use light blue around the shoreline, and then as the water gets deeper, that'll fade to darker blue, and then finally in the middle of the lake where it's really deep, it'll fade to black. But on this lake, I'm using green and black as opposed to blue and black, And that was a very deliberate choice because this lake and this room in general are very loosely inspired by my trips to North Carolina. I like to go to a lot of the lakes up in the mountains of North Carolina, up in the Smokies and Pisgah and places like that. And the lakes up there are green, not black. They are light green in the shallow places, and then it gets to a dark green, and finally in the middle of the lake where it's very deep, it's black. And so that's what I decided to do here. So around the shore, I've got sort of a beige brownish color in the shallow water, and then as it gets deeper, it goes from a light green to a dark green, and then finally in the middle of the lake, it goes to black. Now, for those of you who may be new to the hobby, you might be thinking, hey Eric, what are you talking about? Greens and blacks, blues and blacks? I don't get it. Well, when it comes to doing a lake on a layout, you want to give the illusion of depth, but it's not practical to actually make the lake deep because that means cutting a hole in your layout and it's a whole big mess. So what you do is you have a lake that's only about a ½ inch deep, but with paint you give the illusion of depth. So you use lighter colors on the shoreline and then you fade to darker colors as the water gets deeper. So here I've got light greens and beiges on the shoreline. It fades to a darker green, which fades to a black. And that gives the illusion of depth, even though in reality the lake is only about ½ inch deep. And then of course when you're done painting the bottom of the lake, you put some fake water up on top and the illusion is complete. So that's about it for this table. Now over the next year I would like to get the waterfall and the lake completed and maybe the creek as well. And I'd also like to get some of the town started, but we'll see how that goes. You may have noticed this wooden freight platform. This was a gift that was given to me by a fan of my videos, and it's always very flattering when I get gifts from fans, and this guy made this for me, so I really want to put it on the layout. I will probably put it at the end of this siding right here, but I'm not entirely sure yet. But for now, it's just sort of hanging out right there. You may have also noticed this old phone. You know, people who are into trains usually have other hobbies as well, and one of my lesser hobbies is old telephones and telephonic history. And this is a recent acquisition, and so that's why it's sitting here on the table. But I'm not going to go into that because I could start an entire YouTube channel on nothing but old phones. So we'll leave that alone for now. We're going to follow the track and go through that tunnel, which will take us back into the hallway room. On the other end of the tunnel, we find ourselves back in the hallway room. See, here it is. And we come to this lift bridge. Now, I know that the lift bridge may look fancy, but in reality, it's not. The bridge itself is a single-track Pratt truss bridge that's made by Atlas. And all I did was add hinges on one end so that I can lift it up out of the way. And that's all there is to it. One question that I'm often asked about this bridge is how I supply power to the track on the bridge. So I want to take just a minute and talk about that. When I first built the bridge, I had a system in place that was quite honestly a little bit sloppy, and that's why I eventually did away with it. But what I did was I simply soldered wires to the center and outer rails here, and then brought those wires across and soldered them to the rails on the bridge. And so the wires moved with the bridge when you raised and lowered it. And functionally speaking, that worked fine, but it was sloppy. The wires would get in the way sometimes when you would raise and lower the bridge. And also the constant movement of the wires would eventually cause them to break off, and then I'd have to resolder them. So it worked okay, but it was sloppy, so I eventually did away with that a couple years ago and put a new solution in place. And the way it works now is that the power for the track on the bridge flows through the hinges. The hinges are made of metal, so I figured, well, why not run some electricity through them? And so that's what I did. So here, this is for the outer rail. I soldered it to this side of the hinge, and then another wire is soldered to the other side of the hinge, and that runs underneath and then is soldered to the outer rail on the bridge. Same thing over here. This is the center rail soldered on this side of the hinge. Another wire is soldered on that side, and that runs underneath and connects to the center rail on the bridge. This green wire does not supply power to the track. This is for an insulated track section that is used to trigger a block signal that's back in the Carolina room. So when a train crosses the bridge, it triggers the block signal. And I just ran that through this hole in the hinge and under the track. So if we lift up the bridge again, you'll see There's the outer rail wire coming down. There are those other two wires, one's for the center rail and one's for the insulated track section. And then they simply solder onto the underside here. And that's all there is to it. If you've kept up with my layout for a while, you probably know that at one point I had a counterweight system on this bridge where I had a couple lines of monofilament going down and through these holes. And then at the end of the monofilament lines, I had some heavy metal weights to provide a counterweight system so that the bridge could be in a balanced state when it was in the upright position. But I've since removed the counterweights because they're not really needed in this situation because I've got the mountain here to rest the bridge on, so the counterweights really aren't needed at all. And so that's why they're not here anymore. But if I had this bridge in a wide open area where there wasn't something to rest the bridge against, then the counterweights would be needed and I'd still have them on the bridge. But since they're not needed, they're no longer here. And because of that, the bridge looks better because there's no monofilament lines going from the bridge down to the ground. Anyway, if we continue to follow the track across the bridge, we come to this little area of scenery, which is just something that I built up around the tunnel portal to make it look nice. Above that, you can see more of that Glenn Snyder shelving that I showed you in the main room. It's here on the wall and it's above the doors here in the hallway room. But if we go through this tunnel, that will put us into the fourth room of the layout, which is the Colorado room. Here we are in the Colorado room, so named because it is loosely based on Colorado. The table in here is U-shaped, as you can see. And I made this room the way it is for two reasons, really. First of all, I really like Colorado. And secondly, I wanted to give the appearance of the trains going somewhere, so that they would start in one part of the country and then go through another. And so that's the main reason that I made this room like it is. Now, like the rest of the layout, there's not a lot in here that is 100% complete, but most of the stuff in here could sort of pass for complete to someone who came to view the layout. It actually looks pretty good. The only part of this room that still looks like it's under construction is right here. This area will eventually contain a structure that will be sort of my interpretation of the Coors Brewery out in Golden, Colorado. But as you can see, there's not much here right now except for the track. And I've also started working on the parking lot as well as the grade crossing going into the brewery. But that's about it. There are basically two things going on in this room train-wise. Down below here, we've got the full-size trains that, as you saw, come through that tunnel. The siding splits off from the main line, and that goes to the brewery. And then these two lines go through that tunnel back there behind the trestle, through the mountain, and then they reappear briefly in this canyon, and then they go through another tunnel, and then they come out right here. This track here is the start of the ramp that goes up to the upper level of track in the main room. We'll come back to this in a few minutes. And then here, the siding comes back into the main line, and then the track goes off into the hallway room and to the rest of the layout. Meanwhile, up above the full-size trains is a narrow gauge line. This is ON30. It's O-scale narrow gauge. So the trains are smaller and the track is narrower, but it's still O-scale, so you can run it right alongside the big trains below. The track is Atlas HO track. They do make ON30 specific track. The track size is the same, but the ties are a little more prototypically spaced on the ON30 specific track. But I went ahead and used HO track just because it was a little easier to find. Maybe at some point in the future I'll swap it out for real ON30 track, but for now the HO track works just fine. The narrow gauge line is pretty much functionally complete. I still have to wire up some of the switches, and then there is some cosmetic work such as completing the ballast on the track and weathering the track and so forth, but functionally speaking it's pretty much there. There's basically just a loop of track, nothing fancy. I've got a reversing siding there for turning the train around if I want. And then there's one more siding over here with the passenger station. Now back in the 1800s they may have run freight on this line, but as this is a modern themed layout, today they run a passenger excursion train, and there it is. Those are the new convertible coach cars by Bachmann. All of my ON30 trains are made by Bachmann. I've got two engines. There's the Baldwin there, and then there's a side rod mechanical loco there. I'd like to add at least two more engines before I'm done. There's a new Whitcomb switcher that Bachmann just came out with that I'd like to add, and I'd also like to add one more steam engine before it's all said and done. Both of the engines on the narrow gauge line are DCC equipped, and I use a Digitrax DCS51 to run them. This engine over here also has sound on it. The passenger station over here is a Lionel Rico station kit that I built a few years ago, and to make it fit in this narrow space, I actually cut it in half lengthwise. So if you look from a certain angle, let me zoom in a little bit, you'll be able to tell that it's just half a station. Now, I'm currently working on adding scenery around the station, like trees and so forth, to make it very hard to tell that it's just half a station. There are lights inside the station. I added them. It doesn't come with lights when you buy the kit, but I added some LED lights in there, so when I power up the track, there are lights in the station. There are also two bridges on the narrow gauge line, both made of wood. This is the first wooden trestle that I've ever built, and I think it turned out pretty good. It was a daunting task at first. It took me a couple years to kind of get up the courage to start building it, but once I started building it, it actually came together really fast and wasn't that hard. It's just very repetitive, and over the course of about a week or so, I built this trestle. The deck is not 100% finished. I still want to finish that out a little bit, but other than that, it's completely functional. It was a little tricky getting the trestle to go over these 3 tracks below, but once I got over that, the rest was pretty easy. There's another wooden bridge right here. This is an inverted truss bridge that I also built out of basswood, and the construction of this was a lot simpler than this trestle over here, of course. There's a tunnel back there in the corner, and the wooden tunnel portals and those retention walls were made by me using strips of basswood. It's actually one of my favorite things to do, building things out of wood on the layout, so I really enjoyed making the tunnel portals and the walls and the trestles and so forth. One of the downsides of having a modern themed layout is that I can't make more things out of wood. Otherwise, I'd go crazy making all sorts of bridges out of wood. The other side of the tunnel is back there. You probably can't see it very well. And then I've got the operating wind turbines up on top. Those are made by Lionel, and they do operate. I can turn them on. And over here on the siding, we've got this hobo shed. That's a Lionel hobo shed. I don't know if I'm going to keep it there forever. I may put something nicer in its place, but for now it's okay. Over toward this side of the ON30 line is another siding, and that goes into a tunnel, and it looks like the track keeps going off into the distance, but in fact that's just an illusion. The tunnel is only about 3 inches deep, and at the back of the tunnel is a front side mirror that makes it look like the track keeps going and going. See, if I put my hand down here, there it is. It's just a mirror. And that's a trick that layout builders have been using for a long time. The ON30 line here is not very big, but with a bit of optical trickery, you can make your layout look a little bit larger than it actually is. And it also gives the illusion of the trains going somewhere. People often ask me how I gain access to the interiors of the tunnels on the lower level in case of a derailment. Well, I gain access by way of 2 camouflaged inserts. The first insert is right here, and so if I pull on this section, it comes right out, and there's the access to the interior of the tunnel. I also use this space for storage, and you can see some ON30 rolling stock back there. There's a caboose. And then I've also got my Digitrax controller that allows me to run the ON30 engines. And then the second insert is right over here. If I pull on this section, it comes out like that. And there's access to the other tunnel. And again, I'm using this for storage. You can see some Weaver road railers in there, as well as a power pack for the ON30 line. And then once again, that insert pops back in like that. Now, when it comes to gaining access to the tunnel up here on the ON30 line, well, I'm not so lucky there. I don't have an insert. I just have to crawl up on the table and reach in with my arm and pull the train out. Let's take a minute and talk about the scenery materials used in this room. The rocks that you see were made using the exact same process as the rest of the layout. These are made from plastic casting resin that's been poured into latex rock molds, but I used different latex rock molds in this room to set these rocks apart from those on the rest of the layout, and of course I painted them a different color. The ground cover materials are essentially the same as the rest of the layout, but I did use slightly lighter colors to give this room a different hue to set it apart from the rest of the layout. The ground cover materials are a mixture of stuff from Woodland Scenics as well as Brennan's Model Railroading. The trees in this room are also different than those on the rest of the layout. I bought these from Grand Central Gems, and as you can see, I've bought quite a few of them, and I intend to buy quite a few more before it's all done. The tunnel portals and walls that are used in this room are the same type that I used on the rest of the layout, and again, I get them from Scenic Express. Right now, they're sort of the same color as the tunnel portals and brick walls on the rest of the layout, but eventually I will repaint them to a sand color to set them apart. Lastly, let's talk about the backdrop in this room. Of course, it looks different from the rest of the layout, and that was on purpose. This is a photo backdrop of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, so it's completely appropriate to this room. And again, I get these photo backdrops from www.backdropwarehouse.com. If we come over here, the backdrop does a transition from the Rocky Mountains back to the mountains of the eastern US, and then it goes on to the rest of the layout. So if we come down here to our main line and follow it out of the Colorado room, we will briefly go back into the hallway room across this really narrow table. It's just wide enough for these two tracks. There's a really thin stone wall back here that I made out of plastic casting resin, again, poured into a latex rock mold of a stone wall. And we come across here, and now we come into the other side of the Carolina room. Back in the Carolina room, we are now opposite of the table that you already saw. See, there it is. And so over here, we've got sort of an L-shaped thing going on. The tables over here are not very wide because I needed to have space for the walkway. So there's not a lot of space for anything huge, but there's still some good opportunities for nice scenery and some nice train action as well. So if we continue to follow the bottom track, it goes into this tunnel and through the hillside. And this area of the layout is actually looking pretty good these days. Like most areas, it's not 100% complete, but it is looking pretty good. I've added a lot of trees over here in the last year or so, and I will continue to add more trees in the future. I've added some of that hecky wildgrass material that I showed you in the hallway room. I like this stuff a lot. We've got some deer hanging out in the woods. There's one. And there's another. He's about to jump across the tracks and get smacked by the train. And there's his friends over there under that tree. Most of the trees here are made by Woodland Scenics, although a couple over here are made by Hecky, and you'll see those in more detail in just a second. Right here is another insert that allows me to get access into that tunnel. If I pull this out, I can get into the tunnel in case of a derailment, and it just slides back in like that. And I think I've done a pretty good job of hiding this insert. Unless you know it's there, you really can't see it. If we move on up the hillside here, there's a gigantic spider. Don't worry about him, he's just there for fun. And then we've got an electrical tower up here. This tower is made by MTH. And then I've added more of this hecky wildgrass material up here. Eventually there's going to be a cemetery right here, and in fact right now I'm working on the tombstones. There they are. And once they're complete, I will put them in place here in the cemetery, and then I'll put a little fence around it. So it should look pretty good once it's all done. As we round the corner down here, we've got a mixture of different scenery materials going on. These trees are made by Hecky, the same people that make the trees on the other side of the room, as well as a bunch of the trees that you've already seen in the main room. These smaller trees and bushes are made by Woodland Scenics. This is their fine leaf foliage product. And I also used this to break off twigs and branches and put them on the ground. So you'll see some logs and sticks over there, and that's also from the fine leaf foliage product. And then we've got some more of that hecky wildgrass material up here on the knoll, and I've interspersed some buffalo wildgrass and some Brennan's Model Railroading undergrowth. So I'm pretty happy with the way this area is coming together. Back here, you'll notice this really long stone wall that looks different than the wall down here. This is a textured paper product. I needed to have a stone wall back here, but I couldn't use something like this because there's not a lot of clearance around this corner. And so I ultimately decided to use a paper wall. It's not flat, it does have a bit of texture to it. So it looks pretty good. It's not as good as the real thing, but it'll do. If we come around this way, we exit that tunnel, and if we follow the track, we get to this siding that comes down here, and this will be the home of a yet-to-be-named industry. I'm not sure what's going to go here. I have thought about expanding this siding to allow for a larger industry. I've got quite a bit of space in this corner here, and what I've thought about doing is extending the table out to occupy part of this corner, and then what I would do is, instead of having this siding dead end right here, I would have it curve off and straighten out here in the corner, and then have a big industry here, and then have the track continue on, and then rejoin the track over here with another switch. So it would end up being a double-ended siding. Now, I'm not sure what would go here or how exactly I would do it. It's just a thought right now, but we'll see what happens in the future. Anyway, if we follow the track down here, we get to this tunnel portal, and I've got a big rock wall here, as you can see. There's some more of that Woodland Scenics fine leaf foliage here. And if we go through this tunnel portal, it'll take us into a very long tunnel that eventually puts us back out in the main room. We're now back in the main room, and that tunnel is running through this mountain. And as we move over here, we see a tunnel portal that we've already been through. And as I said before, there are two switches back in that tunnel. If the switch closest to us is thrown diverging, the train will exit out of this tunnel, and that will change the direction of the train. And now, as far as the main loop is concerned, the train will be moving clockwise as opposed to counterclockwise. But normally the switch is thrown straight, and so the train continues through the tunnel behind this rock in the back of that tunnel, and it goes underneath all of this before exiting way back there by the Canadian National Hoppers that you see. And then it moves along the back side of the room, and then it goes into that single tunnel portal that you see there, and goes through the mountains on this side of the room before exiting on the outer track through that double portal. And then we come down here, and we're back to where we started. Okay, so that takes care of our trip around the bottom level track. Now let's talk about the upper level track. The upper level of track really starts back here in the Colorado room. So here's that switch that I showed you earlier, and here begins the ramp going up to the upper level of track in the main room. So let's follow this track as we go up the grade. And actually there are two grades separated by a short break. And the grades here are not very prototypical. You know, in the real world, you would have maybe a 2 or 3% grade at most. And this is about a 6% grade. But I had to do it because I don't have unlimited amounts of space. And in order to make the ramp work, it had to be a 6% grade. And that's the way it goes when you build a layout. Sometimes you have to bend the rules, and that's what I did here. The trains don't mind. They get up the grade just fine. But as far as the real world is concerned, it is a little bit unrealistic. But anyway, it comes through the hallway room again. And then we're back in the Carolina room, and it bends back there. And then we come down here around the bend, and it levels off here. And then as we come around the bend, we start up the second grade. And that comes up this way. And then we go through this tunnel, and on the other side of that tunnel, we'll be in the main room. On the other side of that tunnel, we find ourselves back in the main room, and we are now on the upper level of track. So if we move over this way, there's a switch right there, and that puts us onto a siding. So let's go ahead and follow the siding. The siding crosses over this really cool looking steel trestle. This is a custom built stainless steel trestle that was built for me by Jim Ballman of Stainless Unlimited. This was the first bridge that Jim built for me. It did not look like this when I got it from Jim. It was just raw, shiny stainless steel. That's the way I wanted it. And then once I got it from him, I painted it and weathered it and added the deck up on top. And it looks fantastic. I'm really happy with it. And in fact, I was so happy with it, that's why I eventually rehired Jim to build the big bridge on the main table that you've already seen. So anyway, as we continue to move down the siding, we eventually come down to the door factory. Now this is a brand new building. It's only been here for a few days, so I have not finished installing it, so please excuse the unfinished look around the base of the building. And it's so new, in fact, that I'm still powering it off of some alligator clips. But it's going to look fantastic once it's all done. And here's a look at the backside. So as we move back up the siding and toward that switch again, we'll continue to follow the main line, and we arrive at this town area. And as you can see, this section of the layout is still very much under construction, so don't read too much into what you're seeing here. I'm still playing around with the buildings and the roads and so forth to see what works and what doesn't work. So this will look quite differently once it's all finished. There'll be more buildings and people and scenery and so forth. So again, don't read too much into it. Most of these buildings are made by MTH. The one way back there is made by OGR Magazine. It's part of their Ameritown series. This passenger station is a brand new addition. This is a custom run from MTH that was ordered by Legacy Station. This is the Shady Junction passenger station, and I went ahead and picked one up. Now, this being a modern themed layout, I don't think this will be an active station. It'll be an old station that's been converted to a restaurant or some other type of business, much like you would see in a lot of towns today. I know in the town that I live in, there's a station that doesn't look too differently from this one, and it's been converted to a restaurant. So that's the town area as it is now. And then up on the hill, there's the Lionel cell phone tower, and it does operate. It's got lights on the side and a blinking light on top. Underneath the town here, there's a pop-up that allows me access to this area of the layout, and you can see the seams right around that building there, and that road crosses over the pop-up. And you'll see the underside of that pop-up when we take a look at what's underneath the layout in a few minutes. The trees that are back there on the hill by the cell tower are a mixture of woodland scenics and the Heki trees that we saw in the Carolina room. And again, I'm probably butchering the name of the company. It's H-E-K-I. It's a German company. I pronounce it Heki, but I'm not from Germany, so if I've got the pronunciation wrong, then I apologize. Anyway, if we follow the track, it dips behind those trees. That really tall tree there is a really fancy tree by a company called JTT. That's either a birch or an elm tree, I forget, but they are very expensive. They're about 20 or 30 bucks a piece. Now, the regular trees, the Heki and the Woodland Scenics trees, are expensive enough, but these are the cream of the crop, and I've got a couple more on the other side of the room that I'll show you in just a minute. So, moving on, the track then starts to cross over this thin spine that goes across the back of the main table. There's not a lot of scenery going on back here, but eventually I will add some trees and bushes and retaining walls and so forth. I did add a small wood retaining wall over here a few months ago. And like I said back in the Colorado room, I really like to build things out of wood. So that was a lot of fun building that little retaining wall. And so as we get over here, we find ourselves on the other side of the main rim. So on this side, the track cuts through that hillside back there and then wraps around this way. I've got some road work going on up here. It looks pretty good, but it is not finished. I still need to stripe the roads, and also I need to add some crossing signals to the two grade crossings up here. And in addition to that, the road back there in the corner will eventually disappear into a tunnel, although I have yet to build the tunnel. And then of course I still need to add lots of trees and people and structures up here. So even though this area looks pretty good, it is far from finished. The water tower over here is a Lionel water tower that I repainted, and I painted it blue because a lot of the water towers where I live are blue. The chain link fence down here was built using a chain link fence kit from Brennan's Model Railroading. If you want to learn more about it, check out episode 40 of Eric's Trains. So coming back to the track, we've got the Pocahontas sitting right here, and then that brings us to this big bridge that goes across the main room that you've already seen. So let's take a couple minutes and talk about that. Okay, so just like the smaller steel trestle that I showed you a moment ago, this is also a stainless steel trestle that was custom built for me by Jim Ballman of Stainless Unlimited. And it's pretty much the same concept as the smaller trestle, it's just on a larger scale, that's all. Like I said, I first had Jim build the smaller bridge, and once I was happy with it and knew that it would work, I went back to Jim and I said, okay, now let's build a really big trestle going across the main table, and this was the result. Now, I could spend the next 30 minutes talking about all of the ins and outs of this bridge, but the thing is, I already did that not too long ago, and so rather than repeating myself, if you've got questions about this bridge, my recommendation is to go watch episode 47 of Eric's Trains. That is the ribbon cutting ceremony video that I filmed when the bridge was finally completed. And in that video, it's a long video, it's almost an hour, I pretty much talk about everything there is to talk about with this bridge. So again, if you've got questions, go watch episode 47. You could pause this video, go watch episode 47, and then come right back and pick up where you left off. I will tell you that the bridge was built over a period of 2 or 3 years, and I had Jim build it in 3 sections because obviously it would have been a royal pain to ship a 19-foot trestle. So we split it up into 3 sections, and when each section arrived, it did not look like what you're seeing now. Each section was just raw, shiny stainless steel, and then I took it and painted it and weathered it and then added the deck up on top. And that's about all I'm going to say about the bridge. And like I said, if you've got more questions, before you ask them, go watch episode 47 of Eric's Trains. Anyway, after the bridge, the track comes back through this town area, and then it rejoins the loop at that switch back there. One of the most frequent questions I get about the upper level of track is people want to know how I turn the trains around once they get up here. And the short answer is that right now there is no way to reverse the train once it gets up here. The only thing I can do is back the train down the ramp, or I can detach the engine and bring it around the back of the train and then bring the train down the ramp that way so that the engine is still on the front of the train, but the engine is in reverse mode. Now, there is a plan in the works to add a reversing siding up on this top level, but right now there is no way to reverse the train. But in reality, it's not that big of a deal because while it would be nice to be able to reverse the train, in practice it doesn't come up that much because when I show the layout to people, especially during the open house, I'm running 4 trains. I'm running 3 down below and 1 up top, and they're on autopilot, and so the issue of reversing the train on the top level doesn't really come up in that situation. But still, it would be nice to be able to reverse the train up here, and so for that reason, there is a plan in the works. Now, some people have suggested that I put a Y switch right about here and then have a new section of track and a new bridge coming over here and then rejoining the line back here, thus allowing me to turn the trains around up here. But I'm not going to do that for 2 reasons. The first and most important reason is because there is simply not enough room. If I use 072 track and put a Y switch right here, the track would come around this way and it would end up running into this siding here, and so I would have to do some sort of crossover in the middle of this curved piece, and I really don't want to do that. The second reason that I don't want to put a Y right here is because it would too closely resemble what's right below it on the ground level. I've already got a Y right here, and I don't want to have a duplication of another Y right on top of it. So instead, what I'm going to do is add a reversing siding back here on the bridge. I'm actually going to add a new section to this bridge right about here where the track straightens out for just a second, I'm going to add a switch right here that goes off to the left, and then there will be a new section of bridge that crosses over the classification yard down there and rejoins the line on the back spine over there. And that will allow me to reverse the trains before they head back down the ramp. Now, this is still in the planning stages. It will probably be another year or so before that reversing siding is in place, but this is where it's going to be. Anyway, that about wraps it up for the upper level of track and really takes care of the visible part of the layout. So now what I'm going to do is to briefly show you the underside of the layout, and then after that we'll run some trains. Now, just to give you some context, we're going to start by going underneath the layout right here on the main table, and then we'll sort of work our way down toward the other end. The main table is really the only part of the layout where you can crawl underneath and see some stuff. The rest of the layout just has shelving underneath, which I'll also show you. But for now, let's go under here and take a look. Okay, so we are directly under the area of the layout that you just saw, and what you're looking at here is really the heart of the layout as far as power and control go. Yes, there are a couple small power supplies and a DCC system in the Colorado room for the narrow gauge line, but pretty much everything else comes through here. So what I'm going to do is kind of take you on a tour of all this stuff real quick, just so you know what you're looking at. So starting over here on the left, this is the MTH TIU interface, and that's used to control the MTH trains on the layout. This is the MTH AIU, the accessory interface unit, and right now I'm using it to control some of these switches on the layout. You can also use it to control accessories, but I really don't have any big accessories on the layout right now, so this side is empty, and this side is used to control switches. I'm at max capacity right now, so I really can't add any more switches to this thing. I'm eventually going to have to add a second AIU if I want to control all of my switches with the MTH remote. But right now, the priority was to wire into here these switches on the layout that were not easily accessible. So switches that are very close to the edge of the table, I still throw by hand, but switches that are deep into the layout, like in the yard and so forth, those are wired into here, and so I can throw them via the MTH remote. Over to the right, these are the 4 power supplies for the track on the layout. These are Lionel Powerhouse 180 watt bricks, and they provide about 18 volts of fixed voltage. I can get away with these on my layout because my layout is a 100% command controlled layout. That means my trains are either using MTH DCS or Lionel's legacy command system, and so I really don't have any need for a traditional transformer with a throttle knob, you know, something like this little one has over here. When you're running a command control only layout, all you need is fixed voltage, and so getting a big old transformer with the throttle knobs is sort of a waste of effort when all you need is the raw power. So the first power supply is for the main level of track in the main room, the hallway room, and part of the Carolina room. The second power supply is for the track on the turntable, as well as all of the stalls around the turntable. The third power supply is for the main level of track in the Colorado room and part of the Carolina room. And then the fourth power supply is for the upper level of track, including the ramp. Now, I am eventually planning to add 1 or 2 more bricks to this setup. What I want to do is split this main level power supply into 1 or 2 more units. I don't want to do that to fix anything. There is no problem to fix. Everything works fine the way it is right now. I want to do it as more of a convenience more than anything else, because the way it is right now, this power supply gives power to all 3 loops on the bottom level of track in the main room. And so during an open house, when I'm running 3 trains on those 3 loops, if one of those trains derails and trips the breaker, it cuts power to all 3 trains on the bottom level. And that's sort of an inconvenience because it means I have to reset 3 trains instead of 1. So what I would eventually like to do is to split this into 1 or 2 additional units and have each loop on the bottom level of the main room have its own power supply. So that way, if there is a derailment on one loop, The other 2 loops keep going, and I only have to reset 1 train instead of 3. Moving over, this is the base for the Lionel command system. And then next to that is the Lionel LCS Wi-Fi module so that I can run the trains with my iPhone or iPad or what have you. I'm eventually also going to add the MTH wireless module, so that will probably go right around here. Down here, there's a computer monitor that is hooked up to a computer that's underneath the table here, and that is typically used to update the software on the MTH system. And then we've got an array of smaller transformers down here. Some of these are in use right now, some of them will be in use in the future, and they are basically used to power everything except the track. So buildings, accessories, lights, what have you, all that stuff is powered from these smaller transformers. There's a little Lionel one right here, there's an MTH brick, there's a post-war Z, pretty cool. There's a Lionel 1033 and then a Lionel 1063. The 1033, for example, among other things, is used to power these switches on the layout. So there's a pair of wires going out to a distribution panel, and that goes out to all the switches. And then that also feeds into the AIU so that I can control the switches with the MTH remote. The 1063 over here is used to control certain functions on the turntable. And then the other transformers are used to power lights and stuff like that. Some of them, like I said, are in use right now, and some are not, but will be in the future. I've also got a little DC transformer in the box, and that will eventually be used to power stuff that is better suited for a DC transformer, like LEDs and all that stuff. There's a bunch of wires over here that you can see. This is just some of the wiring coming into this command center. Most of these are for switches, but some of them are also for lights. And speaking of lights, you'll notice that it is lighted underneath the layout. Most of the lighting is provided by this rope lighting that I have. I started off using incandescent rope lights, years ago when I first built the layout. Most of those have burnt out now, like this one here, and so I'm slowly replacing those with LED rope lights like you see here. And I just string it all around the underside of the layout, and it provides a nice light under here so that I can get around and see what I'm doing. Anyway, so that's it for the command and control center of the layout. Now let's take a look at what else is underneath the layout. I'm holding the camera in my hand again, and we're going to get into some really cramped quarters down here. So if the camera shakes around a bit, I do apologize for that. But moving to the left of the command and control center, we've got some storage over here, and this is just the tip of the storage iceberg. I've just got some odds and ends right here, and there's a bucket of standard gauge track right there. You can see some more of that LED rope lighting that I've got all around down here. And then if I turn the camera up, this is an access hole that gives me access to the mountain on the main level, and also gives me access to the upper level of track right around that town area that you just saw before we came down here. So if I move the camera up here, this is the interior of one of the tunnels on the main level. This is the double track tunnel right here, and then this is the single track yard tunnel right here. And if I can get the camera around here, you'll actually see there's the exterior, and there's the main level of track on the main table. And this track is behind the turntable, so we are pretty deep into the layout back here. And if we come around this way, you'll see I've got some cars stored in here. There's a lot of empty space down here, and so I use it for storage. So I'm storing a whole bunch of tank train cars right now. Pretty cool. And then if we turn up again, this is a pop-up hole that allows me access to the upper level of track. And again, it's right in that town area that's on the upper level. Now, I'm not going to open this right now because there's a building on top of this that has not yet been secured down. So I'll just push it up a little bit so you can see. But if I wanted to get up to the upper level of track, this is where I would do it, at least on this side of the room. So, moving back down here, There is the command center, just to get you oriented. And right here, I've got some power distribution boards. These are made by MTH. There's an accessory power board here that is not in use right now, but it will be in the future. This board is for the upper level of track, and then this board is one of the mini distribution boards for the lower level of track. Now you'll notice that there is this middle layer here between the track up on top and the underside of the layout. Originally, I put this here because I was planning on having a subway line on the layout, but that turned out to be not feasible, and so I abandoned that idea, but I still have this middle layer here, and so it's used for storage and wiring, and I'll show you more of this as we explore the underside of the layout. Right here is the start of what is a lot of storage space down here. Let me move this box for a moment. This is a brand new storage shelf that I just installed within the last month. And you'll notice that all of the shelving here is at least a good 6 inches off the floor. That was done on purpose because early on when I started building this layout, a friend of mine said, you need to have your shelving off of the floor so that in case your basement gets wet, as basements tend to do sometimes, your train boxes will not be damaged. And so for that reason, the majority of my train boxes are on shelving that is off the floor, although I do break the rules here and there, and you'll see that as we explore what's under here. But this is some brand new shelving, and you'll notice the stuff that is on the floor here is in plastic bins, and there's a big plastic bin right here. Got an old post-war 97, and my 2 engine cradles right here. So now moving over to the right, this is the main corridor down here, and it runs the entire length of the main table. That blue down there at the end is the wall on the opposite side of the room. So this corridor is about 20 or 25 feet long, and as you can see, there is lots of storage going on down here. This storage here is some of the oldest shelving on the layout, and therefore the lowest quality shelving because I was still figuring things out. You can see the plywood is sagging a bit, but it still works. And I've got lots of boxes sitting over here. A lot of Atlas on this side, although there's also some Lionel and Rail King and some post-war stuff. All of my Atlas switch boxes are on the floor right now. They probably shouldn't be, but of all the boxes I have, the switch boxes are a low priority, and so that's why they're on the floor right now, and the train boxes are up on shelves. But anyway, let's go ahead and make our way down this corridor and see what's there. So let's move down, and this is probably where the camera is going to get a bit shaky because I'm sort of crawling on my hands and knees here. But here are some more boxes. There's the box for the Lionel Santa Fe Northern, one of my favorite steam engines. And we've got a lot of Lionel and Atlas around here. Now, if we turn up, there's the underside of the turntable. I've got a Millhouse River Studio turntable, and this is what it looks like from the underside. There's the main board there, and then there's a cord going off to the keypad that I use to control the turntable. And there's the power supply. It's pretty cool. And you can see now why this turntable was a bit of a pain to install on my layout, because I've got these 2 layers to deal with. So I not only had to cut a hole for the turntable in the top layer, but then I had to cut a couple holes down here to give me access from the underside. So if we move over here, there's another hole for access to the turntable. There's the turntable motor there. And I had this set of studs to contend with, so it was a real chore to get this turntable installed, but it's fantastic now that it is. But there it is. And if I come over this way and put the camera up into this hole, you can see there's quite a bit of stuff stored up here, and you'll see more of this later. And again, I apologize for the shaky camera. So let's keep on moving. There's a little mini fridge right there. And Now we're coming out into the center junction, which is right in the middle of the main table. So if we look up, this is the underside of that pop-up hole that you saw earlier that's on the main level of track on the main table. So that's where we're at right now. We're right in the middle of the main table. This is the underside of the creek that's on the main table. So here's one side of the creek, and here's the other side of the creek. And as you can see, there's lots of storage going on down here. I've got a standard gauge trolley right here, some O-scale freight cars, some Orient Express cars right here, and some nice standard gauge over there. There's some more standard gauge down there. On the other side, there's some more Orient Express cars. Those are made by MTH, by the way. And then over here, I've got a whole bunch of Atlas and Weaver containers. And then some more standard gauge back there. And then of course down here, I've got the shelving that's got lots of Lionel and MTH and Atlas boxes, as you can see. There's a mini fridge to keep the drinks cold. And then behind me, that noise you're hearing is this air purifier, which is a good thing to have on a layout. It helps keep the air clean, and more importantly, helps get rid of all that train smoke in the air. And then behind that is the basement door, and the door is currently blocked by the layout, so it is not functional, which is probably a good thing from a security standpoint. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue down the corridor. I've got some Atlas boxes here, and then over here there's a mixture of Atlas and MTH. And then over on this side, things start to get a little disorganized because I have not yet completed all of the shelving on this side of the table. So there's some stuff on the floor that probably shouldn't be, but even here there's a little bit of logic to it, because if the basement's going to get wet, chances are it's going to come from the hot water heater or one of the water pipes around the kitchen or something. And so this spot right here is about as far away from the water heater and the kitchen as you can get in this basement. So if the water heater did break, this would be the last area to get wet. But even at that, I still want to get this stuff off the floor, because you never know, and it's better safe than sorry. So eventually I will complete all the shelving around here, and all of this stuff will be off the floor and nice and tidy. But anyway, I've got some boxes with magazines, OGR magazine and CTT magazine, and also Lionel and MTH catalogs are in here somewhere. As you can see, some train boxes and some passenger cars within easy reach. Over here, there's another power distribution panel. This is for the main level of track. And then we come into the final junction at the far end of the table. Things open up a little bit in this last junction, and that's mainly because of the lack of shelving. But once I get all of the shelving installed on this side, it will get a little more cramped. As you can see, there's some more train boxes. Got some Brennan's Better Ballast hanging out right there. If I turn around, I've got some track. There's my Atlas track, and then up here I've got some Lionel Fast Track. And then if we look up this way, there's another pop-up hole, and that gives me access to the interior of the mountain on this side of the room. Now, it's pretty cramped up in this hole, but I'm going to try to get the camera up here anyway. So first of all, right here is that middle level, and as you can see, there's plenty of space here for storage that I have yet to utilize. Now, if you look straight ahead, you'll see something that looks like a car jack, and that's exactly what it is. It's a used car jack that I bought off of eBay, and I used it to jack up that spot on the layout because it was sagging a bit. When I designed this layout, as I said, I added this middle layer here thinking that I might put a subway in. Well, the subway never happened, but because of this middle layer, there are a couple spots on the layout where it tends to sag a bit. And so to fix that, I put this jack in place. So here's the jack key, and there's the jack, and it worked like a charm. That area of the layout is no longer sagging. There are actually two jacks on this side. There's one there, and there's one back there. I'm not sure if you can see it. But they worked great, and those spots no longer have a sag. So if you've got a sag in your layout, try a car jack. You know, it's just like a real house. if your floor is sagging in a real house, you have someone come over and they jack up your floor, and that's exactly where I got the idea. So I figured, well, if it works on a house, it'll work on a layout, and it did. So now let's move up, and we are now in the tunnel on the other side of the room. And in fact, if we look out this tunnel here, you can see all the way across the room, that's the tunnel that we were in a few minutes ago. So now you can kind of get an idea of where we were and where we are now. And this is what the interior of this tunnel looks like. Pretty cool. Now, there is no pop-up above us to give me access to the top level of track because it was impractical to do it right here. So if I want to access the track on this side of the room on the top level, I just have to get up on the table and walk over to it. Oh, and by the way, in case you're thinking of doing something like this on your layout, and I'm talking about having a middle level for a potential subway line, my advice would be to not do it, or at least to not do it like I did it. This was one of the many mistakes that I made in designing this layout, and in fact, that's why the rest of the rooms, the hallway room, the Carolina room, the Colorado room, do not have a middle layer like this, because by the time I got to those rooms, I realized that this was not a good idea, at least in the way that I did it here. So that's one of the things about building a layout. Sometimes you do things right, sometimes you do things wrong, and when you do things wrong, you learn from them, and then you don't do them again. And trying to have this middle level here was certainly something that I would not try to do again, or at least not like this. So let's come on back down. And now if we turn this way, you can see the corridor that we came down. So let's head back down. And here we are at the Command and Control Center. So that does it for the underside of the main table. So if you've ever wondered what was under here, now you know. Now, while there's a relatively large amount of space under the main table to crawl around in, the rest of the layout is not like that. It looks more like this. It's just shelving with train boxes, and you can't really crawl around. The only exception to that is right here in the Colorado room, where there's a little bit of space under here to crawl around in, but not much at all. Most of it is just boxes like that, and it generally goes by manufacturer. So right here it's mainly Lionel, but in other spots it's MTH or Weaver or Atlas or what have you. Okay, that concludes the tour portion of this episode. Now I'm going to wrap things up by running some trains around the layout for a few minutes. But before I do that, I want to go over some social media stuff for those of you who may want to find out more about the layout and Eric's Trains, or may want to follow Eric's Trains on an ongoing basis. So the best place to start is my website, www.ericstrains.com, and from there you can get to everything else. You can get to my YouTube channel, which is right here. You can get to my Twitter feed. You can get to the live layout webcams. I'll talk more about those in just a minute. And you can also get to my Facebook page. Now, the best place to go to find out what's going on with the layout and the videos on a day-by-day and a week-by-week basis is my Facebook page. I usually post there several times a week, so if you want to know what's going on, that's the best place to be. Now let's talk about the live webcams. As many of you know, there are 4 live webcams on the layout, 2 here in the main room, 1 in the Colorado room, and 1 in the Carolina room, and they allow you to see the layout in real time. But I've said this before, the live webcams are not a guaranteed show. It's sort of like peeking in the window, so sometimes there'll be a lot of stuff going on. I'll be running trains or working on the layout, and at other times there will be absolutely nothing going on. It just depends on the day and the time and how busy I am, but you do have that option to see the layout in real time. Now, the cameras are not on 24 hours a day. On weekdays they're on from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. and on weekends they're on from 12 p.m. to 2:30 a.m. However, I will at times turn the cameras off for privacy reasons if I have company over or family in town. And I'll also turn them off at times if I'm going to upload something to YouTube, because the uploads go faster if I'm not hogging all the bandwidth with the webcams. But other than that, you can tune in and watch the layout in real time. A lot of people really enjoy it. You can get to the live webcams from my website, or you can get to them directly at webcams.ericstrains.com. So now that we've got all that social media stuff out of the way, it's time to end this video by running some trains. I'm going to start off by putting a camera on the front of the train, and that will give you a train's eye view of the entire layout. And then after that, I'll run some more of my favorite trains around for a while as well. So enjoy the trains. I'm Eric Siegel, and I'll see you next time.
Dispatcher, are we clear through the crossing? Over.
That's affirmative. Clear ahead. Over.
That's great. Clear signals ahead. Out.
dispatcher. Switch line. You're clear inbound. Over.
Thank you, sir. Cleared into the station. Out. Going off duty. Have a good one. Out.
And as we move back up this way, son of a...